You've never seen a key before, and you have some registration process that provide some credentials that they already have that gets associated with that. And then you give them points for that. How do you guys appreciate kids? Okay, it's time to start. Yeah.
Good morning and welcome to the Dynamic Host Configuration Working Group. And I'm sure you've seen this slide many, many times, so please note the note well. And the blue sheets are coming around, so make sure you sign up on those. If we do have anybody that's willing to do Jabber scribing, we would greatly appreciate it. And also Etherpad note takers. I did put the agenda in, so at least you got a little bit of a template if somebody can update that as we go. I'm one of your co-chairs, Bernie Volz.
Hello, and I'm Tomek Mrugowski.
And where's Sheng, our secretary? I guess he's not in here yet. Okay. Yeah, because right. So one of the things that was distributed recently to the working group chairs was a document review request that came from the IESG retreat. And, you know, we've recently had some issues with lack of responses for working group last calls. And, you know, just the IESG felt it was good to remind people that document quality relies on reviews. So you really need to review documents in the working group, and they would prefer if you also reviewed some documents from other working groups. And again, if you don't review the documents, people won't review yours. So, you know, if you have something in the pipeline and you want reviews when it comes time to requesting those, or, you know, during the discussion, make sure you send reviews on someone else's document. Anything else you want to?
No, it's basically, you know, common sense. I mean, if you do a favor for someone, you can expect that someone to return it.
So this apparently, according to Tomek, is our 10th meeting as co-chairs. One of the things that probably should do is have any, you know, if people have any comments, feedback about things that we do badly or could do better, we'd love to hear it. You know, we also like, if there are things going well, that's good too. Or any other comments. And if you want to share something now, that's great. If you want to do it in private, or if you have some issues you want to raise to Suresh, our area director, feel free to do so.
You guys are doing great.
All right, that was Ted. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
So here's the agenda. It hasn't changed in terms of the order. Do we have any agenda bashing that needs to happen? I know, Ted, you have you would like to go early, and good that you're on early. So I guess we'll leave the agenda as is then. You want to do the?
Yep. Okay, so this is the document status update. So the first draft, first renew extensions. There has been no progress, and I know that one of the primary authors has some personal emergency. So we hope that this will be resolved soon, and then the work on this will resume. The next one is DHCP6 failover. So we had last call, it failed. It's now on agenda, so I have a dedicated presentation about it. Prefix land hint issue. It was updated and it's on the agenda, so we'll learn more about it in a couple of minutes. The Young module for DHCP6, it was also updated and will be presented. GT315Bs, it was updated, and our belief, by our, I mean the group of people that work on it, believe that it's ready, so we started last call. There's a presentation on it later, so you will get the details. The secure DHCP6 is also been updated and going to be presented later. TopConf, it's now, I believe, with ISG, there were some comments raised by Security Directorate. I hope I addressed them and upload the new version. So as far as I can tell, we just need to wait and see what happens next. Okay, so there's...
Suresh Krishnan. So one thing I want to do is like the security gate CPv6, like I want some signal from the authors and the chairs that it's like kind of semi-ready, so I can ship it off to somebody in security to do like a do-over before like it goes on to IETF last call. So
we got a review from security area director. His name is
Kathleen?
No, the other one.
Stephen?
Stephen.
Okay, very good. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So, but that's not to say we don't mention.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
So, and just as a comment, I think that we still have a little bit of work to do on that, I think, before it's ready. But we'll discuss it. And Suresh, why don't you just give a brief update on the MUD presentation that was done by Lear at IETF 95?
So this MUD is like something that's kind of trying to figure out like for a device, like what kind of things is expected to do. And there's like some DHCP options required for it. So last time Elliot came and presented this here. And so I think the chairs like kind of explain like how the DHC working group works. So stuff that's required for other working groups is usually done there and reviewed here. And this thing really didn't have a home. And since then, like I've spoken to Elliot, and so this work seems to be homed in OPSOG, like Ops Area Working Group pretty much. And so the decision like is that like both the actual work and the DHC stuff is going to be done there, and we're going to bring it here for review. So there's like no op as well for the actually taking up this document in DHC, but it's going to be reviewed for sure if the work goes through. And that gives us like the advantage is it gives us fate sharing. So if the main work dies, we're not left with the DHCP option for something that didn't go through. So that's the update on that.
Okay, thank you. Ted?
Ted Lemon. Suresh, can we get some email when there's progress on that, so that we're not just, so we don't only see it at the end of the process?
So yeah, sounds good, Ted. Like so, let's say, so I'll set like arbitrary stuff. So if the main document gets adopted, yeah, so I can send it off. Thanks.
Okay, and we also had another hackathon in Berlin. So this is photo of the part of the room. There was, according to the attendees list, that was 140, I think, attendees. So the room was pretty crowded. As for the DHC part, we decided to do an experiment. So we had implemented binding, or whatever you want to call it, a plugin for the sysrepo project, which is netconf and that's storage for YANG modules and provides netconf interface. So we had an experimental implementation that applies the configuration changes to Kia. It was rather basic, but it seems to work. So the code is available on GitHub.
All right, thank you, Tomek. All right, Ted, you're up. There is a mic here, and you are asked to stand in the pink square. Wow.
Okay.
Okay, we need this one.
My metronome was going. So we might as well proceed to the first content slide. It was so nice when we had monitors like there that we could look at, but we don't. So this is just an overview of the protocol. I think probably at this point most people already know how it works. We do an information request, which is anonymous to establish the server's key, and then the server's public key, and then we use the public key to encrypt the rest of the communication. For people who are familiar with public key cryptography, this will make sense. For anyone else, it's wonderful magic that works. Next slide. Yeah, so we got a nice review from Stephen Farrell on this, and a little bit of history here. We had a meeting, I think it was in Yokohama, where we talked about how we needed to get working. We needed to get this work done. It's been going on for 4 years now, I think. So Randy Bush said, look, just put in one thing, and that one thing should be a PKI-based thing that involves pre-shared certificates, and get that working, and then we can expand on that. Stephen said, this is weird. Why didn't you put tofu in, trust on first use? That seems like a more useful use case, which is, so we got a little bit of conflicting steer from various different people about this. So we revised the document. I should say Lishan revised the document. I had nothing to do with it, to include tofu. For those who don't know what tofu is, trust on first use is basically the usage pattern that you see when you use SSH and you use it to a new host. You get a host key. You may or may not do something to validate the host key. Maybe you just figure your network is secure, so this probably is the host. And then it stores the host key. And after that, if you connect to the host again, it validates the host key so that you know that you're actually connecting to the same host you connected to the first time. This is the same idea here. Once you've connected to a server, you know the next time you talk to the server that's the same server because it's got the same key. Next slide. Right, so client authentication isn't necessarily always required, and it's not, the use case that makes the most sense to me, and it's not, I'm just saying this is my own personal belief, it's not that everybody thinks this is the most important use case, but the use case that makes the most sense to me is you're connecting to a DHCP server that you've connected before, or you're talking to a DHCP server you've talked to before, and you also get something from some other DHCP server that may or may not be a valid DHCP server. It would be nice to be able to know that you've spoken to this DHCP server before. It's the same one you talked to before. It has the same cert, and so you just use that one, and you don't use the other one that doesn't have a cert or that provides a cert you don't know. And in that case, the security mechanism is essentially protecting the client from a rogue server. It's not protecting the server from anything. The server is open. It's allowing any client to connect, and that's actually a pretty normal usage model for DHC, and it's not a usage model that we want to prohibit here. So that was Stephen's main point there. There were also some oversights in the security design that Stephen pointed out. I don't want to go into too much detail about this because I think it's not really all that exciting. If anybody's particularly interested, you can come up to the mic and ask for more information. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah, so we were a little vague on how to encrypt. We referred to some other documents, and Stephen said try to be more specific. So next slide. And then So timestamps are, as long as you're not exchanging more than one DHCP packet per second, a timestamp is essentially an increasing number. It's a strictly increasing number. It's a technical term. It means a number that the next time you get it, it's always going to be larger, never smaller, and never equal. So timestamps have that quality, but timestamps aren't the only thing that have that quality. Not everybody has access to a time source, so requiring a time source for replay detection isn't necessarily the right thing to do.
Francis Dupont, I have a comment about this. This return everywhere and the increasing number is fine because the client have stable storage. I'm afraid it's not true for many clients.
Yeah, so essentially we have two options here. One, first of all, a client that doesn't have stable storage is probably an IoT client. It probably can't do this anyway, but there may be some clients that don't have stable storage but can do this. They probably have a clock. So, and if they neither have stable storage nor a clock, then they can't implement secure DHCP.
Yes, I agree, but I believe a reasonable clock is more likely than a stable storage.
Right, but the point is you can do either. It doesn't matter. We're not specifying that you have to do one or the other. You can use a clock, you can use stable storage. It's fine either way.
I believe timestamps was optional in the previous document, just for this kind of reasons.
Sorry?
I believe timestamps was optional
Right.
and fine.
Yeah, that may be true.
Yes,
Yeah.
was recommended, but optional.
Yeah.
So I have one other comment on that, Ted, Bernie Volz, and that is that I think right now it's only a 32-bit option, which seems to me kind of limiting. I think it should be at least like a 64-bit, because that seems to be what most of the other, sort of replay attack prevention timers are, or
Sure.
time values are.
So that'd be great. Then we can have microseconds. Then we can have many more DHCP packet exchanges before we run into replay problems per second. Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds fine. Next slide. By the way, the one thing I'll say about that is that I do think that's overkill. Because, realistically, what we're trying to avoid is a replay that, it's 2 to the power of 32, which is like a pretty big number.
Well, I think
I think it doesn't matter because I don't think IoT devices can do this anyway. But for constrained devices, the difference between 32 and 64 bits is actually a real difference. So
right. Well, I think if you put in there that the comparison is modulo 2 to the 32nd, then I'd be happier. But there was no text about that. And
yeah, right. So there's no text about rollover.
Right, and so that's the problem that I think that the 32-bit quantity has is a rollover problem. And
right. So probably what we should do is do something like the
TCP sequence number check.
Sequence number rollover stuff. Yeah. Right. Okay. That's a good idea. I mean, I honestly don't care either way. I think 64 bits would be fine too, but we probably ought to be conservative about that. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out how to explain this one. Yeah. So the issue here is that the previous version of the document. This was actually something that I complained about. The previous version of the document required that if a client, it essentially required that a client send individual packets to individual servers, and even in cases where the server might share a key with another server, and you could actually send a packet that was encrypted with a single key that would be understood by both servers. And so I just wanted to make sure that in the case that the servers are able to share a key, you can send one packet. You don't have to send a packet to each server because that's unnecessary. Next slide. By the way, how many people have read this document? Okay, cool. Oh, there you are. Hi. Sheng is here. No worries. Okay, so let's see. Yeah. So I actually don't remember this change, so I can't really speak to it. I apologize. Next slide. Right. So the idea is that if a client sends a packet, this is after the information request. If a client sends a packet that that the server is able to decrypt, but the server isn't able to encrypt a response because the algorithm that the client has chosen is not supported by the server, then we need to make sure that the server doesn't reveal any information about the client when it sends its reply back. That's, you know, and there's actually two ways to address this. This is one way. The other way would be to have the server announce what algorithms it supports in the information request reply, so that anyway, so because the information request exchange contains no identifying information about the client anyway. Next slide. Okay, so next steps. I'll tell you what my perspective on next steps is, and I'm curious if anybody has any input on that. I think that the document is getting close, and it sounded, Stephen said that he thought it was getting close too. It's not quite done yet. I think that it needs at least another revision with, so I'm planning on personally doing another revision that has some changes that I think belong in it that you know, we'll discuss on the mailing list. Basically what I'm going to do. It's a working group document now, so I don't really hold the pen on this. I'm going to propose some changes to the mailing list, and we'll see what people think. Basically, this is just going to be editorial, trying to make the document clearer and more readable. And I think we're and you know, I think we're pretty close at this point, but it's nice work. Francis.
Francis Dupont, I have two comments. First, I believe it's an illusion to get a client, a bootstrap, validating a certificate chain. Not yet communication with the networks of these certificate was revoked or things like that.
Yeah, you can't get a CRL.
But it's a standard problem with PKI, so
yeah.
I don't believe we need more than saying security considerations, and this problem has no real solutions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you can do is you can I mean, you could do something similar to stapling. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is ask the client to go validate the certificate after it's got an IP address.
Yeah,
and
yes.
If that doesn't work, then put that in a cached CRL, assuming you're capable, assuming you have stable store, and then restart the process. I think that's the best you can really do.
It's usually what is done, but a second problem is I've read the whole document to see what is the encryption algorithm. As there is one and two which I say I have two problems with it. First, there is no encryption algorithm name I say. There are a lot of variants because of the fact I say is not a symmetric cipher. So we have padding problems, etc. So I don't believe it's a good idea to use directly ISA.
To use directly?
To use directly an ISA variant to encrypt the message.
An RC variant?
Yes, ISA variant. No, so ISA is limited on the length what it can do. You should not use the same key pair to string on the encrypt, etc. There is many reasons to not leave the document as it is. So you have something for the next step.
Yeah, you're right. So can you write that up in a message?
I recommend to get a cryptographer asking what is the best thing to do for this case.
Okay.
For instance, just a cipher, a block for asymmetric things,
Okay.
which do both on you authenticated encryption of the things.
Did you have
For instance, I don't know, so I'm not a cryptographer. There are some, a lot of cryptographers here, so
yeah. Okay.
pick one.
All right. Yeah, that's something that, Suresh was talking about, getting a more thorough crypto review, and I think that's something to do.
So
Bernie
Volts, and I have a whole slew of comments because I read the documents on the way over and stuff, and while there's things that went in a good direction in this last rev, there are, I think, also things that went in a bad direction.
Okay.
In terms of the last time it seemed like it was a little bit too overspecified. Now I think it's a little bit too underspecified or whatever. So
Okay.
I'll send those comments to I'll send it to the working group mailing list.
Wonderful.
So just so you're aware of that.
Yep.
There are quite a it's a lot of them are editorial just because there's a lot of weird writing or whatever, but most
Yep.
of them there are a few technical issues as well.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Nobody else seems to be sprinting for the mic. I think maybe we're done.
All right. Well,
All right.
thank you.
I will thank you. Farewell. Have a nice meeting.
Hello, I'm Bernie Volts, and I'm going to present on some work that Yujendra and I did, which is a draft to secure the exchange between relay agents and servers. Again, I presented this at IETF 95, where there was an issue, especially with the network access identifier draft that is now in RFC, that the IASG had some concerns about some of the data that was being sent from the relay to the server, and they really would like to see that get secured. Next slide. The current state of the security is that really there is no security for v4 documented anywhere. 3315 has to use IPsec, and it's not a must. There's no reason you couldn't use IPsec with v4 potentially, but it was just never specified. Next slide. So what we're proposing in this draft is to do what 3315 already says to do, which is to use IPsec. It is available on most OSs already, and hopefully it's also typically available on routers and firewalls and other things that might need to get involved in the DHCP exchanges. We didn't make it a must. That's something that the working group, and maybe we'll have to debate with the ISG to see what they want to do. It's highly recommended unless you have some other mechanisms in place that secure the exchange, VPNs or other things that already do a level of encryption. So we document that the main reason this is very critical is that, again, there are certain pieces of data in that exchange that, other than obviously revealing the client's packet, also reveals other information that might be considered sensitive if somebody were to do the pervasive monitoring to snoop that traffic and use it for other things. Next. So the IPsec details are that they, it says here must, but that's only if you're doing IPsec. And it gives you a recommendation on the encryption algorithms to use. For key management, we felt that basically doing the manual key management should usually be sufficient, because in most cases you're configuring, you know, this relay has to send to this server or these servers. And similarly, if you're doing relay chaining, that typically you would configure the relays to, you know, send to the upstream relay anyway. So manually configuring the security association keys that you need there shouldn't be a big deal. However, there's no reason why, you know, you couldn't support public, you know, ICE and stuff if you wanted to have better distribution mechanisms and things like that. Next. So the question is, do people feel that, you know, the ISG definitely feels that this is something we should work on. Do people in the working group feel this is something that we should work on and to move to adopt this draft? You know, are there alternate security mechanisms that we might want to consider? And finally, you know, if you have any other comments or questions for us, we'd be happy to take them. So, comments, please.
Suresh Krishnan. So one thing that might be useful to add here, there's a RFC that talks about key management. That's like 4107. And in that it says like, if you propose manual keying, the burden of proof that that's the right thing to do is on you. Okay. So, and there's like a section there that talks about, like, you know, cases where it's appropriate. And there's like, I think there's 4 cases. Like one of them, it says like, this is like, the traffic is not of like good high value, or like you're not going to be sending much traffic, and or there's like 4 of them. Okay, so the other one would be it's like a limited thing of limited bandwidth, right? So I think the one that might be appropriate is there's not going to be too much volume of traffic. So I think that'd be good to mention. Like, so refer to 4107, say, okay, this is why we believe this is better. So that would be something good to add. Like, so the question doesn't come up later in the security stuff. Francis? Oh, you're reading 4107? Okay, thanks.
Who's reading the abstract?
Okay, thanks.
So
that's it, Benny. So just like try to take a look at that section and then put the stuff. Because I know it refers to the OSPF manual keying, but I think they kind of went through at the same time, so it didn't have the same burden of proof, but yeah.
First of all, I was reading the abstract to understand exactly why you wrote this, and now I know it's about privacy, which is a new thread which was not addressed in the previous RFC.
Right.
So now I understand why you are here.
Yeah, and you know, even if we do secure DHCP, we still that secures the client's data, but it doesn't secure the relay agent and servers exchanges. You know, because they add the relay agent adds information into the packet.
Before it was just a security thing. So it says the infrastructure is not secure, you can use IPsec. But now we have another reason, it's the privacy.
Right. So, is there anybody that is opposed to this, you know, being a working group item? And we'll ask on the mailing list. Sorry? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So since Ben is involved in this work, I should do the question. So, is there anyone opposing this work or have any negative comments? Okay. I see nobody, so that means that the group is in general in favor. So, but we'll do the adoption call on the mailing list.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to update you. regarding the Rani, are you running the latest version of the slide?
I believe so.
Okay, well, anyway, the failover draft was around for a while. So we have received, this is not the latest version, we have received 3 thorough technical reviews in the last half a year. So we decided,
Here,
okay,
let
but
me
okay.
get the latest version, and you didn't tell me you updated it, so I didn't know. Come on. All right. I don't know if there's a good way to show these, but
okay. Yeah, anyway, so these are the reviews that we received so far. So technically, even though I'm co-author of this draft, I was not doing anything about it for the last year or so because I was busy with the busy work. So I personally, I consider myself as, you know, external reviewer. But anyway, okay, Bernie, we can you switch to the full screen with? Okay, Bernie, it would be better if you switch back to the, no?
the old slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Where is that stupid thing? Come on.
Okay, so anyway, we started last call a couple of weeks ago. It was the failover is a complicated draft, so we thought that extended last call would be in order. It lasted 3 weeks, and we received a single response, so that was my review of it. So it was not the most successful last call. So Kim addressed the issues and then uploaded version 02. But in general, the last call failed due to lack of interest. So next slide. So my question to the working group is, what happened? We've presented the failover a couple of times, and people were generally in favor. So there were people responding that they are interested. So, but nobody said anything during the last call. So the question is for people who hasn't responded. So that's almost everyone. So why? So did you lost interest? Do you think it's not important anymore? Maybe the draft was too complicated. Maybe you didn't have enough time. So can you just?
Ian Farrer. We've been looking at this, and it's a problem that we need to solve. It's just that we've come up with a different solution that doesn't involve a standardized protocol by centralizing our database. So it's put us in a situation where, yeah, we just don't really need it.
Okay.
Marcin Siodecki. I think all the reasons you stated for not reviewing it by probably most of the people are true, right? It's very long, it's very complex, it takes a lot of time, people do different things, but it's certainly not a good reason to eventually not review it, right? So I raised my hand to review it. I failed, but I promise that if you guys organize the other last call, I will do my best to get to it and review it finally. So.
Okay, so thanks for that. So for the note taker, we have one. Marcin Siodecki promised to review it if we go with another last call. Okay, any other comments? Okay, so what? Okay, Suresh.
Krishnan. So can we also try to figure out if, like, ask the opposite question? Does anybody want it? Like, so, because like if like there's people thinking like it's not needed, we probably also want to hear if there's people who care for it too, because when we take it to the IESG, right, like there's like something that the shipper has to defend, saying like, okay, like there's like people who like feel like this is needed and stuff like that. So if nobody's going to use it, it's not required, right? Like that's kind of my thinking. So maybe it doesn't have to be done here, but like probably send off a note saying like, is there anybody who wants to use it, just to get some input.
Okay, so well, we can try it now. So who in the room?
Which is different from reviewing, right? Because
Yes, yes, of course. But just want to get general feeling of what's the current perception of the.
Yeah. So the reviewing is like a higher bar because people have to spend some time. People may say like, oh, if it gets done, I would probably use it. So.
Okay. So who in the room thinks that? Yes, that you consider using it or feel that it's useful. So please raise your hand.
Okay, so it's not that many.
Okay, so that's 4 people.
Yeah, I mean, we actually already implemented it. I mean, it's not, because we need IAN assigned options and things like that to do it. We didn't use that. We used vendor options and things to do it, but we've actually already implemented it.
In Farah. It would also be interesting to know, I mean, I see this has been a companion to the version 4 equivalent, and there may be people who have implemented the resilience functions on V4 that haven't got this far with V6 yet. So it would be an interesting data point to know how many people are doing this on V4 who, may look to use the same architecture with V6 if it was available.
Yeah, and we do both V4 and the V6.
But do you know if people are using it?
Yes. Oh yeah, we have, I would say that, it's hard to do a exact poll of customers, but
Sure.
my belief is that almost all of our customers are using failover because they want the higher availability of their servers. So,
Okay.
And more customers are using V4 because that's just what they have deployed,
Yeah.
but they're all the ones that, were using it for V4 want it for V6 as well.
So another data point from IC, we also have many customers that are using failover. We currently support V4 failover, and some customers are asking about V6 failover.
This is Yogenj from Cisco. So we have different product where we always evaluate, do we need to do the failover or not. I mean, today we do not use it in our situations, but we do not say that we will not use it. The reason is we wanted to read through and see, because the ecosystem of the failover for each product is slightly different. I mean, how do you adapt to it? So we wanted to go and review this and see if we can adapt to it, we'll adopt it, or assuming that it can fit into the ecosystem of the product we have it. So that's the state what we have. So I'm going to review that as well.
Okay, so next slide, please. So essentially, we have 3 options in my opinion. So the first one is to redo the last call and see whether people would react more actively. So if we go with this route, so I have a recommendation. Probably we'll start if we do it, we'll start the last call mid-August after we complete last call for the DHCP6Bs. So the recommendation is if you can do thorough technical review, that's great, please do it. If not, just take a quick look at the draft and say whether you think it's useful or not. So next slide. So the next option is we could try publish this as is. So this is a work that has a very long history. So let me summarize this briefly. So the previous one, the V4 failover, it started in 1998 and was developed for, I think, 5 years. So it died somewhere around 2003. And in 2012, we started this V6 work. So it's been going on for 4 years. And I'm afraid that we could just end up in the same place, that there's a draft that is expired. So maybe it could go as experimental or maybe AD sponsored. One of the problems is that if we go with experimental, we won't be able to assign any option codes because they require standards action.
Suresh Krishnan, just a point about AD sponsored, right? So if I do it as AD sponsored, I would like to send it to somewhere for review where the experts are, and it's going to come here. So it's not going to really help.
Okay.
So out of A and B, I prefer A.
Okay.
Brian Haberman, ISC. Send it through the independent submission stream.
Okay.
And then the only thing that you guys would have to do, or the AD of the working group would have to do, is make sure that it doesn't collide with work that's being done here. Yes, I know you don't like that.
No, Suresh Krishnan. So forget about the point that I don't like that, but the option actually requires standards action, so it cannot go through ISC.
So this document without
I thought that there was, no, I understand that, but I thought that there was an option in there for an experiment. That there was an experimental option that they could use to do it. Right. So instead of doing an allocated option code, you use the experimental option code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we
And then
didn't make any provisions for that in the registry. So that might be something that, you know, if we wanted to do that, that we'd have to set up like a range of what would
Right.
be considered experimental options.
I think there was some provision in V4 option space, but not in V6.
Okay.
No, there isn't even. There, in V4, there's the vendor options, which are, well, which were designed to be site options rather than vendor options. Yeah, right.
Okay.
It's not even, I think it's site, yes, it's site options is what they were called.
So that, I mean, okay, so if there was an experimental code point, then that would be one way to do it through the ISC and not have to
Correct.
worry about all of this stuff. But
Yeah.
But I definitely agree with Suresh. If you do AD sponsored, it's just coming back.
Okay. So and finally we have the third option. You know, to just drop the work. So it doesn't require any further comments. So next slide. So what are the next steps? So Danny, I suppose I am doing the presentation, so it's up to you to ask the working group and determine what's the feeling in the room is.
Yeah. So do we have any further discussion about any of the options or what people would like to do with this work before we ask further?
Suresh Krishnan, I like option A. Like, but if you're gonna do a hum, I'll just keep quiet on that. But I prefer option A.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we do a hum, and just to remind people, the choices are A is another working group last call. B is publish as is, although that may have,
Try to publish.
yeah, try to publish as is, although that may have the issues that were discussed. Or C is drop the work. So those in favor of A, please hum. Those in favor of B, and those in favor of C. Okay, well, I think we have our answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Suresh Krishnan. So like, I think like C will be an option if A doesn't like actually pass. So we don't want to do this again. So like, hopefully the next working group last call will pass, but otherwise we'll just go with C by default afterwards.
All right. Next, we have the DC PV6 Yang model.
This is the Yang models for DHCP v6, and we have the version 3. Okay, next slide, please. So, since we missed the last IETF, so I will tell you something about what's new since the Yokohama. Technically, we have defined another generic option formats described in RFC 7227 to support a series of standard options. And then as for the option configurations, we use the option set ID. And it means that you could locate this kind of nodes under each level. So it means that you could configure an option set on the global level or on the subset level, something like that. But there is a discussion about whether we need to change to option set name or something like this. And also, Tommy has helped to assign this document to the Young Doctor Review, and it is studied from the July 1st by Peter Van Horn, but I haven't received any comments from him. So maybe I will go to the Benoit or some Dan for some.
Yeah, so the young doctors are organizing a stream of reviews. So it's currently available for DHE chairs, but they are hoping to announce it publicly. So we are, I think, early participants in this review stream. So it's not yet working as expected, but hopefully they will deliver the review.
Maybe we'll change another young doctor. Maybe.
I don't know. I suppose I will ping Benoit and we'll see.
Cool. So another thing is that for this hackathon, we finished the basic mapping to the Kia configuration. And what we have done is produce a minimum mapping between the working group documents and the Kia's configurations. So it is also available at the GitHub. The link is here. So if you have any interest, you could just go to have a look at that. Next slide, please. And here I want to share some findings when I do this mapping to the Kia configurations, because this actually is the first implementations that we are look at. We have global level parameters or local level parameters. The local means that it could be a subnet level or pool level. Sometimes I think that in our model, we define some like the preferred lifetime timer, something like that, under the smallest level, like the pool level. But in the Kia configuration, they could define in the global level. So maybe a solution is that we allow those definitions everywhere. Maybe we could use the grouping statement in the Young model, something like that. And the second thing is about the option set configurations, which is also the most important thing for the DHCP v6 configuration. We currently have two different ways to do that. We have a full option list with well format, and we also have a generic option format for you to define it. But currently we don't describe it very clearly in the document. So I think we need a clear text in the draft to describe the difference. And currently we will just support these two, and maybe if you have any idea, we could just drop one or choose one. That is okay. And something like we also need a login module, because it is very common in different implementations. And we also need some DHCP v6 vendor specific or custom option definition. I think that is all in some other implementations, maybe Nominum or some. So the above findings are all Kia specific, but also similar things exist in other implementations. So I'm looking forward to look at other implementations if there is any volunteers for that. Next slide, please. Okay.
I can explain why you don't have the same problem with DHCP-v4. The option space in DHCP-v4 is nearly exhausted, so it's not common to have to define a new option. For DHCP-v6, you have a lot of free space. Right. So we really need a way to add the new DHCP-v6 options.
Right. So in the next version, I will try to add some container in the Young models. So if other implementations have some comments, you could just send to the mailing list.
Ian Farrer. So the way I kind of see this problem, and I'm one of the co-authors on this draft, we took the concept of having the generic options as being those taking and describing the format specifically that 7227 has. I've seen, certainly in the couple of DHCP server configurations that I'm familiar with, that there is also a much more free-form possibility in there where you can, arbitrarily string different data types together. The question here is, I think, is really, is that something that we should see if we can find a way of modeling? I'm not sure how we would do that, but is it something we should attempt to do?
Yes, I think maybe, as Bernie has suggested, this is a question to the young doctors, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's two, representing the data instead of, more sort of binary or, octet form or whatever has the advantage, right, that you can define any new option or have any new option represented, right? And then that's what typically our server does, is it stores, the configuration stores the binary data, but we also have a definitional language that you can define how it should display or allow you to enter the option data. Okay, so it's you don't, if it's a v6 address, you can put a v6 address in, even though it'll show as 16 bytes of hex data, right? And I think that's something that I don't know whether some of the Yang or netconf tools have that kind of capability where you can say, here's a definition of the instance of the data, and here's a definition of how to format that data, either for input or output, and whether those can be married up. And so if that is possible, then it'd be nice to have the option instances be defined as just the raw binary data with a dictionary of how to format. And if that's possible in netconf Yang, that'd be great, because then we don't have this problem, because you can, if there's no definition, you just spit it out or let people enter it in the hex format.
I mean, I think what you described there, certainly Kia has it, the Nominum server has it, and I'm sure other implementations have a similar kind of concept. I'm not at the moment sure how exactly we would represent that in Yang, but it's something, if we think it's desirable and we need an interface to it, then we can certainly attempt to do.
Yeah.
The question beyond that is, would it be a good idea, because 7227 already has this idea of, here are some predefined option formats, and these are recommended for use unless there's a damn good reason not to. Should we keep those? Should we replace this with the arbitrary option definition format, or should we have both in there?
Well, I think we need to find out what's possible, for this, as I just previously described, because I think part of the problem is with having this new stuff that was added recently, which allows you to do those 7227 type primitives, is most of the newer options aren't basic ones. They're more structural definitions that use combinations of those things. It's an address, an integer, and that kind, or a list of addresses or whatever. So I think that's what we really need to, I think the model will be too simple if we only allow those basic constructs, right? And so I think we need to look at this issue and see what's possible in the Yang netconf space first.
Okay, we'll see what we can do there.
Yeah. And having 3 or 4 different formats for specifying the stuff, to me, seems like ugly too, because then it just makes it more complicated without really providing significant value.
Yeah, so I mean, again, this is something that we've wrestled with, because I mean, the model, when we went and we, tried to define every option that's in there, we have missed 1 or 2, as Marcin pointed out. But the intention was there to say, here is a ready set of predefined formats that you can just take. They're all backed up by standards track RFCs, so there's no question about how those need to be defined. And I think from an operational point of view, that's a desirable thing to have. The concept of saying, I want to define this option, now I've got to go and roll my own, work out how this is, this just makes it very, very difficult to interact with, particularly for, the more common options. So, it's that kind of trade-off of a larger, but arguably more usable model versus having, a number of different possible ways that you can do things.
Well, the other problem that you have with you define each option in the schema, with its stuff is that anytime IANA revs it, right, you've got to rev your schema. The Yang model has to be revved in some way. And
yes, well, no, because if you've got this extensibility in there, then
Right,
have
if you
at
have-
least way of saying, with my current model, I can support, hopefully anything that's foreseeable, assuming that your the option definition format is flexible enough. So that's not necessarily the case, and this is the same as the concept behind the 7227. Here are some things that are already in there. So a new RFC gets published that uses these things. You can define your own code. You can define your own data that goes in there, and you're good to go without even having to rev the server. It would follow that kind of idea. I think we'll try this and see what comes out. But as an operator, the idea of having to roll my own option for everything that's already well defined seems unattractive.
This is Yogendra, Cisco Systems. So do you have in your draft option to provide a context information also? I mean, meaning to say, if I can bind a pool or a instance of a server to a context, keeping in the mind that you have virtualization a lot, and DHCP secure is coming in, where you can have your certificates, which could be common for the multiple contexts, and it could be local to the specific context.
Currently, we don't have this, since you mentioned, I think. Just, we don't support the security. We just some basic configuration. What would you want?
So basically, I'm saying is tomorrow, if you're going to have a secure DHCP v6 in, and you're going to have a certificates, PKI certificates on the server, you wanted to link that certificate to the instance of the DHCP server. Right?
Here
So-
comes the problem. How many implementations will use the secure DHCP v6? If they just all express their feelings that they think this should be included, and we will just add it. But currently, we don't know. So I think that currently we just to keep it as a minimum set would be a better choice.
So basically, the question is, do we have a provision to do a addition of a context? If a context is there, then you can have the other such information can hang on top of it. But if you don't have a context information, then you cannot hold those information. It will fall as a global information then.
Okay, so by context, you mean basically any arbitrary type of data that the server can use?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't think this should be done in the DHCP v6 YAM models. You could define any other YAM models for those, but I don't think we should combine them into this one.
It needs to. It's an independent entity, but it has to go to all the technology which is going to incorporate the Yang thing.
Right, you could just
So
load several YAM models.
Correct. So
for
basically,
you.
you need to just find it out how we can attach that information also, so that we have that information there.
yeah, I guess maybe this is Bernie Volz, but maybe if you have, if there's other Yang models that do this, if you can maybe send the authors some pointers to exactly what you're, if there's some other Yang models that already do what you're asking for, that they can then look at to maybe copy that if it's appropriate.
Ian Farrow, just to, I mean, the normal way that this is dealt with in the Yang world is around augmenting functions. And, when it comes to the secure DHCP stuff, there's a lot of things in there which are, well, from what I've seen of it, that are generic security functions that we would need to augment this with, or reference, or whatever it happens to be. I'm a bit loath to, if we continually put every work in progress into here, then we will never get anything published. And so there comes a point where you've got to kind of cap it off. But what would be good to know is if there's anything in here that could be improved, or anything in here that would prevent an augmentation that would allow that functionality to be added in afterwards. That would be, very worthwhile feedback, I think.
Right. And this is Bernie Volz again. I agree that, the secure DHCP v6 stuff has had many revs. And so I think until that gets really nailed down, I don't think we want to pollute the model with it, because we don't know whether it could change. So, while it's, we hope it, this is the last round of the secure DHCP v6 stuff, history has shown that that hasn't been the case. Sorry, Marcin.
Marcin Szyldowski. I wanted to briefly speak to the previous point about the options. I think I'm with Bernie that there should be a separate container for the option definitions. This is what we do in our implementation, and I'm aware that other implementations do the same thing. I read the whole Yang model like a couple of days ago, and it struck me that it's very confusing that you have like you have the option sets where you're setting the values at the same time you can be setting like the option, the option formats, right? So and I'm very unhappy about the concept of adding like a 7227, right? Option formats into it, because it makes it even more confusing that you can specify the option that just has a single, I don't know, IPv6 address or single integer value. If you move the whole thing of option definitions into a separate container, you don't have to do it, right? And it will be much more clear. And the final point about this, the clarity of this, is that you should really improve the descriptions of the parameters that you have in the Yang model, because when I was reading through that, it took me like a chunk of time before I could figure out what the certain parameter is supposed to do, and I'm still not clear about all the parameters. So please improve that, and I'll keep an eye on it. I'll try to provide more comments. Currently, I focus on the server side because I think it's useful. I don't think that Yang model for client is that useful, but Ian has a different opinion about it.
Well, I have one question for you. You just mentioned that we should support the option definition, right? So we should support a separate container. Do you want this container to cover all the vendor-specific or the new INS assigned?
The container should be flexible enough to allow you to specify a new standard option that is not in the model currently.
So you want to do all the things in one container, right?
Yes, and the vendor options. I don't know, we do it in Kia, we do it in ICDHCP, we can handle that for vendor options and standard options, so I don't see a reason why Yang model data structure wouldn't allow it, right? So.
Ian Farris. So I mean, I agree that the whole way that the options are defined does need some work and certainly could be cleaned up. But as I recall, the reason that we put the 7227 options in was the last time we were presented. That was the recommendation of the work group at that stage. So in out. Maybe if we've got this generic way of doing it, if we can find a workable way of doing that, that could replace the 7227 functions, and that would help to clean it up. But
Marcin Szyldowski again. I think the problem is that when you introduce something like this, people will always ask you like, why did you introduce that option on the other option and option format? I mean, like, it's quite common that you're going to have like a list of DNS servers, which will be an array of IPv6 addresses, not only a single IPv6 address, right? And array is currently not supported in the Yang model. My question will be why, right? So I don't know. I think it makes things much more confusing, right? You've got like too many options. You don't know what you should be using, and also the judge should better explain in which cases you're going to be using hex format, in which case you're going to be using like a predefined option format, in which case you're going to be using like 7227 specific format, right? The job doesn't explain it very well right now.
yeah, okay, understood.
Next slide. So here comes the problem. The applicability of the model to real implementations. Actually, this model has been developed without any look at the specific implementation. So it just defines a generic DHCP constructs or structures. So the current model have to compare with the existing implementations. So we have done some work in the hackathon, and I think we will continue doing that. So, but we still need more information about more implementers, about their structures, about their constructs. So please, if you have any comments, just send it to the email, to the mailing list. So next slide. So I want to tell you something about what will be in the new version to make this current document more readable, because I know that the current model is really complicated and very long. So we decided to add more text to the model descriptions, something like that about the descriptions about different option configuration, something like that. And we will also split the model into configurable and operational sections, because currently we could just focus on the first one, on the configuration nodes. And I think it's better for the model's implementation when we just try to map it to the kiosk configuration. We found that. And we also...
Sorry, I'd just like to interrupt on that point, Ian Farrow again. There was an interesting presentation yesterday, I think in NetMod, where they were talking about where you should model configuration and operational state data. And I think it's an interesting question for us, because I mean, the outcome from that is, it depends, whatever is best for the thing that you're trying to model, the thing that you're trying to operate. And I think we've got an interesting question here about, is a separate section for all of the operational data more useful than having, say, stats on pool utilization and things, those operational stats located with the configuration of that pool. I can see logic to both of those approaches personally, and it would be valuable to know what people think would be more useful here.
But I think it also depends on the actually implementations of netcom for young. For example, the sysrepo that does not support the operation.
Yeah, but that's
so maybe we should make it more.
That's functional incompleteness there, rather than actually, this is not the model's fault. So, and something that should come in the future. Other implementations shouldn't suffer from that. So, I mean, that would be interesting to know if people think it would be more useful to locate those things with the definition of a pool or a network range or whatever it is that you have, or whether they should be set out in a separate part of the tree altogether.
So, Bernie Volz, I forget what modeling it was a long time ago, where, they spent days on arguing about, is something configuration or is it, state?
Yes.
And I personally think, I mean, hypothetically, right, you could have, if you mix the stuff, it gets very confusing very quickly, because on a scope or prefix definition or whatever, you could say, oh, I want, this many total leases. Okay. I don't want you to exceed the server, it's a limit that you want to set, right? But there's also the thing is, what is the current total limit? So it gets very confusing very quickly as to, is this a thing you can set, or is it something you can get? And if it's configuration data and it's state data, right? You don't know if you're reading something, are you reading the configuration, or are you reading the state, the current state? Because you could, the two may not be in sync, right? Yes. So I think separating the stuff personally is a better model. And it also it makes it cleaner for people when they implement the stuff, because you could implement something that only lets you get the state without having to do the configuration part. Right.
Okay.
So that's just my you wanted input, that's my input.
Well, another thing is that we have to make the model more slimmer, because we currently have some redundant nodes. And the most important thing is that we have to incorporate outcome of mapping models to other real implementations beyond the kiosk, what currently we are trying to do. So we hope to get more feedbacks from the implementers. Next slide. So the next steps. First, we will resolve comments from young doctors if I got them, and continue working on the young interface or plugin for the Kia. And also another thing is that we need a careful review for our option set container, especially the full list option. So I just want to ask any volunteer here will do this, because this is the GHC room.
Martin Szyderski, I did that partially. I sent my comments to you, but maybe not the options of container specifically. But I think you should turn this specific bullet to careful review of the whole model, right? Not only option sets, because people may think like, oh, he just wants me to review this part, whereas there's a lot of broken things in the model outside the option sets, right? So just, make sure that you pull reviews for hold model.
Okay. And we still need input from the vendors, implementers. So any other comments?
This is Alex Petrescu. I don't work for a vendor. I sent an email on the DHC email list. I wanted to ask whether the young model that is in the internet draft has been developed from scratch or has been developed starting from a MIB, management information base.
From what?
A MIB, MIB. Existing management information.
So
base.
you're asking if the model was developed from scratch or was based on a MIB or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
No.
yeah, I think it was from scratch because there is a MIB for DHC. Was it an RFC or?
I don't think so.
Yeah, maybe it should have been a draft at one point. I forget now. May have been, Suresh will probably know. He'll tell us what the RC is in a moment. But anyway, I don't think it was developed using a MIB because there really isn't a good MIB for DHC.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking this is that maybe input from vendors could be obtained if we simply go to the platform from that vendor, take that MIB, and take that MIB and generate a model and see how that model compares to this model. So that would be input from vendors, I believe.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank
Suresh Krishnan. So there's like a couple of vendors here, really. So there's like Cisco, like ISC, like probably 2 ISC platforms here. So maybe that would be like good stuff. Thanks. And I just wanted to bring up one thing. I'm pretty sure like Linui, you looked at it, or Ian has looked at it. There's like this opt-state requirement stuff in netmod. Like there's like a draft. And so that's probably something you want to read, like specifically about opt-state. Okay, so I think it's draft IETF netmod opt-state recs or requirements or something like that. So I think it's worth reading. Okay, it's been slowly developing, but it's something that would be relevant, especially for your opt-state kind of questions. Okay.
So any other comments?
Okay.
We've done this one.
Thank you on that.
And the other document is about the DHCP v6 prefix length hint issues. Next slide, please. This is some background information about this document. Currently, it is an active working group document, and this was first presented in IETF 93 Prague, and we have received substantial reviews and comments since then. And we made few updates after last IETF meetings, and this is basically according to the mailing list discussions. So next slide, please. We still got some minor issues here. The first problem is that if clients request such this specific /60 prefix in solicit message, so does it imply that the client is willing to accept another /60 prefix if the one it really actual request is not available? So our solution is that if the client is willing to accept another prefix, and it should include a prefix length hint in the solicit. So it means that the client is welcome for any other /60 prefix. So this is our solution, but it's not in the draft. We are trying to put it in the next version. So next slide, please. And the other problem is that should the client send a hint if it has a wider prefix assigned than it is, because this is the situation that when the client requests for /60, but it got a /40, so the client may still want to get exactly what he wants. So our solution is that client should include a hint in the solicit or rebind message, but it cannot do it in the renew message because we want to avoid the renumbering, right? So that is our solution, and it will also be in the next version if there is no comments, right? Next slide.
So just a quick comment. I think this, right, I mean, it can include it in the review if in the renew if it doesn't mind to renumber. So it's not a, it's not a must not include, right?
Right.
Okay.
And another thing is about the document type. There has been lots of discussion on the mailing list, whether it should be an informational or should be a standards track. Most are in favor of the standards track. So our solution is that we have already added normative language into the solution sections of the draft. And we have already changed the document type to the standards track. And the next slide, please. And that is what we did for the normative language. We use should to regulate client-server behavior in each DHCP v6 messages. And we only use must to regulate client behavior to avoid failure. So it means that we only have 2 must in our draft currently. Next slide. So for the next steps, we have updated a new version on July 19th, and there's no additional issues raised on the mailing list. So what's the next steps? Maybe move to working group last call.
Yeah, so does anybody have any comments about the presentation or the draft itself?
Can you move one slide back? So client must neglect advertised messages containing prefixes which it can't use, but what about the case when the client can use addresses that received together with prefixes in INAs?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
So it says client must neglect advertised messages containing prefixes which you cannot use and probably continue solicits, right? The question is, if the client has requested some addresses in INAs which it can use, it shouldn't probably neglect the advertised message, right? But should rather use whatever it got and then try to renew and keep asking for the prefix it wants, right?
It's a complicated case, right? Because
I mean, if you say must neglect, then you
right. I mean,
you essentially tell the client
I think
what
it's
to do exactly, right? So
right. I mean, this might be a case where must neglect if all it requested was IAPDs, right? And it's a more complicated question
or
or
you cannot
something.
further operate without those prefixes, right? But
right.
There should be some wording to tell that it's still possible for the client to get the lease and then continue with renew, because this is what the stateful issues allows for, right? So,
Ian Farrer, question to, I think, slide 5. No, not 5, back another one. And again. Yep, that's the one. So this one puzzles me a little bit because, I mean, we've got essentially a question that's been, or something that's been indicated by the client, which is, if I can't have this prefix, I would rather not have a prefix at all, i.e. I would prefer no connectivity to renumbered connectivity, which is certainly an interesting case. And I wonder how genuinely useful that is. The second one is that is the option of saying, well, the : /60 kind of indication in there, is that not open to being interpreted by the server as being, you won't get the same one, or you might get the same one, but there's no guarantee of it. You're willing to take anything, so have a new address. And could that actually actively reduce the level of stability that the client has?
Well, I think the intent here was, right, this is like in a solicit that if the 2001 : /60 in this example isn't available, right, well, back off a second and say that if all the client sent was a 2001 : /60, is that, in the pure sense of a hint, there's no prefix length hint there, okay? Because we kind of said, if you read the 3633 and 3315 biz, the hint is the case where there is no, no prefix part of the address, just a prefix length. Okay, the address is 0.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's really the core question is if there's no hint in the request, but there is a specific prefix requested, should that prefix length that was in that request be considered the hint? Or should we always have the client send an explicit hint length? You know, so the question here is if 2001:60 is not available, right? For whatever reason, the server can't give that. Maybe some other clients got it now, right? What prefix length should the server use as the hint? And that's why we're saying put in the ::60 as just a hint to tell the server. It doesn't, to me, this doesn't, you know, this just means what is the hint if you can't get the one you want. The server should give the client the one it wants, right? Which is 2001::60. But if it's not available, what is the hint?
So are you differentiating there by the way that this is understood, or maybe I'm missing something? But so in the event that the client sends 2001::60 and that is not available, what is the correct server behavior?
So if it doesn't, if there's no /60 as a hint,
Yes.
right, then the server is really left to figure out what it, you know, whatever default prefix length it's going to give or whatever, right? Whereas if the ::60 as a hint is there, then you're telling the server, I want a /60.
Right. But this is not the way I read that text at the moment. If the client is willing to accept another prefix when the requested prefix is not available, so it's requested 2001::60, which is a specific prefix definition in its own right by the way it's defined. That specific one is not available. Does the server then say no address, no prefix for you?
No, see, I think, yeah, I do agree that the text here is bad, right? Because it's really, the client, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by, you know, the client is willing to accept another prefix.
Well, but that's, I mean,
I
those are
know.
exactly the
I
words
think
that are there.
what, you know, I mean, if the client isn't willing, you know, if it wants a 2001::60 and it's not available, you know, gets the advertised back, it doesn't matter what's in there. If it's not what it wants, right, it's probably going to ignore, it's probably going to go back and try soliciting again after a retry time.
Well, I mean,
right?
if the client is that bent on saying this is the prefix I want, and if you don't give it to me, then nothing else is good enough.
Correct.
Then, you know, which is a case that I struggle to come up with a use case where.
And I don't think it is a valid use case. I
Yeah.
think this should say if the server is unable to give the client what it requested, right?
Yes.
Then it, you know, to handle that case, right, the client should include the prefix length hint to say, I would like another /60. You know, I would like a prefix that is a /60.
I mean, I agree with what you say there. It's just, this is, you know, quite a long way from what's actually written at the moment.
Yeah, and we should fix that, I think. So either, are you going to comment on it, or should I flag it as something I should comment on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, so it looks like we will probably need at least one more rev. I also, in reviewing the document, have a few additional comments. They're, you know, most of them are pretty minor typos and things like that, but there's some other, a few little things in there. So I'll send out something to the list shortly, and we'll have another rev, and then probably we'll try a working group last call.
So Krishnan, so if you go back to the previous slide, not this one, the hint.
The one that we just
60,
talked about?
Yeah. So what else can in the problem case, like what else can the server assume other than this? It's either like you can give him that or not, right?
Well, again, I think the issue is that if the 2001::60 is not available,
yep,
right, is the fact that there was a /60 request considered a hint that it wants a /60, or should the client always include an explicit hint?
I understand, but if it doesn't include that explicit hint, what else can the server assume?
Well, it can just use its own, whatever is configured by the server to be the default prefix length, which could be a /60, but it could be a /64. It could be something else.
Right. Like, so if the client is like specifically willing to like take this or something else, it should do it. Otherwise it shouldn't, right? It should just send this thing and take whatever the server default is, right?
Right, but if it needs a /60, because suppose it has 3, can't take a /60, typically there's multiples of 4 that, 4 bits that are done for prefix length delegation just because of the nibble stuff, right?
Okay.
But if it can't use the /64, because suppose it has 3 downstream interfaces that it wants to configure, right? So it needs something shorter than a 64. It needs a /60. This is what the hint is all about, is to say, I want you, if you can't give me what I explicitly want, give me at least a /60.
Okay. So why is the should? Like, that's my final thing, right? Like, so if this is something you always want, make it a must, like, because should doesn't tell me like when I should or like shouldn't, right? Like, so.
Right. I do think that that's probably, we need to go through a little bit and check that, because I think, some of this language tends to be soft because the original 3633 stuff was very vague about it, right? And so we've been a little bit cautious about trying to make it too mandatory, right? And this is it's not a big issue if this is like a separate document on its own, and we'll talk about this shortly, but it's a bigger issue if we're going to incorporate all this in 3315 biz, because then it becomes part of the core standard and, is a little bit, I think in some ways it's not the wrong thing to do, because I think being very explicit about how the hint should be used and what it means is a good thing.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think we'll have to do another rev, clean up some of these things, and then we can consider whether we start a working group last call.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, my name is Naiming Shen of Cisco Systems, and this is the draft, and Anke Ching and I co-authored. It's trying to solve the problem of DHCP relay source ports. Yeah, the problem is like this. When an implementation has a very scalable DHCP relay implementation, and one way of doing this is to split the processes to multiple processes on the same router or same switch. Each process can handle different jobs. DHCP relay is one of the function inside of that process. So in the case we have seen is the wireless LAN controller, and you need to handle a large number of APs. And in this kind of implementation, sometimes we would like to split the job of the controller functionality for all the APs into multiple daemons on the Linux process. And this DHCP relay functionality, according to the current spec, needs to use the single defined source port, which is the 67.4v4. Yeah, question.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's not a question. Francis Dupont, as a previous writer of DHCP v6 relay code, I can confirm the choice of the port to use, source and destination, is a real nightmare.
Yeah, I'm not sure I get the comments using both the source and destination, and well, let me continue on this one. Because we have multiple processes trying to handle the DHCP relay functionality, the way if you have to listen on a specific ports for the inbound packets coming back from the server, then we have to define a new process which listening on this ports and also understand the DHCP internal data structure in order to remember who this inbound packets to give to for the multiple DHCP relays. Next. Yeah, this draft is proposing try to relax the source port requirements. We say the client of the DHCP is not in the picture. We don't want to change any client's source ports for this purpose. This problem is a DHCP relay problem. And also, this problem is particular to large scale, that kind of implementation. So the extension is to allow DHCP to send out the packets using the source ports may not be the defined that particular port number, and also listening on the port it uses for its own process. When it communicates to the servers, relay to the servers, or in DHCP v6 case, relay, it could be another chaining DHCP relay on the upstream. And so the extension requires the DHCP server to use the same UDP ports the DHCP relay uses as the source port when replying back to the DHCP relay. Next. So in this particular case is for v4 DHCP relay. In the relay agents option, we defined a source port sub-option, and there is a code length is 0. So basically, it's an on and off that kind of a sub-option, and when the server sees this sub-option from the DHCP relay, is supposed to check the inbound DHCP packets for the UDP source ports. When replying back to the DHCP relay, and it needs to use this as the destination UDP ports. So reflected back from the server if this sub-option exists. Next. And this is the DHCP v6 proposed a new option called relay agent source ports option. And in this particular option, the option length is 2. So the DHCP that relay UDP source ports number is in this option. So the reason is, we were, Bernie commented on this one because the DHCP v6 has chaining of relays, and you can obviously cache whatever the downstream relay DHCP source ports, and you keying on the IP address of that downstream relay, and you cache that information. When the reply packets hits this cache, and you use the source ports as the destination ports downstream reply, but it's more complicated for implementation, all those things. So this is much simpler because DHCP relay encapsulates its own relay forwarding into its option. So the whatever the cascading that UDP port will be preserved hop by hop. So this is a simpler approach, more straightforward for implementation. And when this option presents, when the relay or server sending packets back to the downstream DHCP relay, it needs to use this UDP source ports in this option replying back to the downstream relay. So any comments? And
Ian Farrer. So how many clients, I mean, DHCP relays by their, very nature tend to be distributed, and certainly, in my network and other deployments that I've kind of looked at, you're talking about a few thousand, maybe tens of thousands, but, that kind of order of magnitude of the number of clients. Now, if you multiply that out, or, you work that out with a 12-hour, 24-hour lease time and the number of messages per second that you need to handle, the answer is not very many. You end up with a few messages per second that need to be processed. So, I mean, have you got any data on the volume of messages, of DHCP messages that have been handled at a relay that require this to be split into separate processes and necessitate all of this?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this one is in the particular application we look at that is the wireless LAN controller, and the DHCP relay functionality is just one of them. And there's all the other things, AAA, all those other things related to the authentication and the other things with the wireless LAN controller functionality. Right. So all those things, because of the loads, the design is to split them into different processes. Let's say each process handle 2,000 APs, that kind of thing.
2,000 APs, okay.
Yeah. So it's not like a particular how much load the particular for DHCP relay that particular point, but it's overall AP handling by the controller design.
And just as a brief interjection here, typically in the wireless LAN type of thing, especially if you're like in a shopping mall or someplace where people are coming and going a lot, okay, right? You're not going to have 24-hour lease times because, and so the load tends to be higher there just because of much shorter lease times.
So I mean, in terms of messages, maybe backed up by AAA, I mean, do we know how many we're talking about here? How many clients are we supporting, or how many messages per second?
No, I don't have any numbers.
Anke, you want to answer this?
So we already today, as a vendor that also Anchor Chain from Cisco, we basically we are in the business of doing the wireless LAN controller. So today, if you look at from AAA's point of view, we basically, we already actually need to have like 200 UDP ports to talk to the server already.
And that's 200 separate processes.
It's today there's a limitation in radius itself. It can only support up to 256 packets in flight because it's a request and reply. So the workaround is to do parallel sessions, right? We are already doing that. And the requirement from our customers is basically to do a 10x. Right, for performance. Now, so we are, the only way to achieve that, because this is already, with one process running, doing the DHCP, doing the radius, it's already completely packed. So the only way to do it, to do horizontal scaling, so you can use multiple cores. That's where the parallelism comes in. So if you want to do a 10x, now you will have 10 or 20 of these parallel sessions, right? That's where we have issues, right? With when the packets come back, obviously we don't want to go through another hop of the front end of the packet. How to demarks to them, right? We have a problem in this area. Yeah, that's where I think typically you don't run into this, but wireless LAN controller is another challenge. Certainly. Yeah.
In a fixed line DSL type environment, I've certainly not seen anything that would necessitate this or any of those problems in that. But yeah, I mean, the wireless LAN case is one I
And it tends to be very bursty.
Yeah, and we haven't seen this also before, right? Until now, this is one example of the wireless controller application, and I have seen another example. We require this kind of a separation into multiple processes, other than the wireless LAN. So yeah, the problem I think is real, and yeah. Any other comments?
Martin Shulesky. Just quick reading. Just had a quick reading of one of the sections. It seems to me that you say the relay can operate on any port, including 547 or 67, right? I think it would be wise to say if the port is not configured, it means it defaults to 67, 547.
Thank you.
Norman Kowalewski, Deutsche Telekom.
Can you speak up a little?
Yes, Norman Kowalewski, Deutsche Telekom. So if there is a load distribution, the main driver of this and the separation of concerns, there are of course different ways how to handle that. You could split it across ports. You could also argue you could split it across some addressing model.
Right.
Is there a specific rationale given why the one or the other is better, considering that the deviation of what you're doing from the traditional use of these ports is significant?
My answer to that would be that for V6, it probably doesn't, you could argue that it's probably not a big deal, but from V4 standpoint, it might be, right? Because on, V4 to sign something, 20 addresses or something is potentially a problem, right? V6, it's not a big deal to use, 20 different V6 addresses.
Ian Farrer, but if you're talking about the connection or the communication path between your DHCP relay and the DHCP server, this is kind of operator-side infrastructure, so would probably be privately addressed anyway, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So if you were running this on loopback interfaces or,
Right, but it's much harder to configure that in, for, virtual addresses and things like that. So it's just a little bit more work.
No, but the question is, I mean, harder to configure versus impossible.
Right.
So we're talking about saying, could we solve this with something we can already do, or do we need to extend the protocol to solve the problem?
Right. And I mean, like anything, this is an optional thing. So if you don't want to do it, there's no reason you have to do this, right? And I mean, that's something that I think, the usage or applicability statement in this draft has to be fairly clear that says, and I think there was language to this that says, you really have to make sure your servers and upstream relays support this before you can start using it, right?
Yeah, which makes a fairly high implementation of that potential.
Yeah, it's I think one comment is it just seems simpler to basically just relax the requirement. If you look at the typical Unix applications, I mean, you typically specify the server port. The source port is allocated randomly locally, right? You really do not care. So, but when the packets come back, that's where you have the uniqueness, right? Yeah. So what this does is basically say, okay, let's just relax this a little bit, just to make it the same as all the other, Unix applications.
Yeah, and also for the comment of the IP addresses usage is this, it may not all be private addresses, right? And also needs a special configuration for more IP addresses just for this particular purpose, right? Why not just relax this port number requirements, add a simple option, and just handle it if you need this?
Yeah, so just as Bernie mentioned, right? This is the option. I mean, you use it when you need it. Most of the cases you don't need it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
So any other discussion? And, I mean, a question would be, do people think this is worth considering adopting? Obviously, we do the working group adoption call separately from, any determination here, but, does anybody have any comment about whether they are adamant that, no, we shouldn't do this, or either say, yeah, let's go do it? Or any other comments? How many, just as a hum, then I'll ask, how many people would favor adopting this work as a working group work item? How many are opposed to adopting it as a working group work item? Okay, thank you. All right. So do you want to do this, or should I start this? Okay. Okay. All right. So next we have a update on the DHCP v6 biz work. This was just a, it is right now in working group last call until August 8th. And this is just to give people sort of a reminder as to, what we were trying to do, and give you an idea as to sort of where the major changes are, so that, in your review, you can focus your attention on those, because obviously that's going to be the most critical things to look at the stuff. I mean, the whole document's critical, but the most critical is to review things that we've changed. So the original goal was to merge 3315 and 3633, the base standard as well as the prefix delegation. Also, we wanted to incorporate any of the erratas that were published to those standards. We also wanted to incorporate a limited number of other core protocol RFCs, those things that were critical in terms of the operational issues, such as the, Info Max RT and Sol Max RT changes. We also needed to incorporate some revisions to the standard through like the stateful issues RFC 7550. Originally, we had hoped to, as part of this work, promote it to internet standard. However, because of the nature of the changes and things, that we felt that it was, while we have good operational experience with DHCP v6 in general, we don't really have people that have implemented this particular set of changes. And so we feel that it's far better just to continue with the current draft standard, and hopefully a year after this becomes an RFC or something, we would, ideally we would just be able to promote it to internet standard, but it's possible we may have to publish a shorter biz document that fixes a few minor things. But that's something that, is an open question of the working group as to whether, if you feel the document, if you read it and you feel, hey, we should really just go for internet standard, then it's something we should discuss. One of the things that we just want to be clear about is that it was never a goal to wrap all of the V6 documents into one document. So there's a lot of options and things like that that are defined in separate documents, and those will continue to be defined in those separate documents, because that's a never-ending effort to do that, because there's always new options being defined. Okay, so it was really to focus on the core protocol standard and not to incorporate everything into one document.
Okay, so before we move on, I just wanted to give you a brief of history, how this work has been conducted. So it started as a bit of kind of archaeology project, because, the original 3315 was written in NROF, so it hasn't been used in a long time. So first it started with, like a couple of weeks of development of a tool. I wrote this tool, and it sort of did the conversion, but it's not really possible to do it automatically. So then we spent a couple more weeks tweaking the output. So finally, we got the 23315 XML, and we published this as the initial individual submission. So this is almost, word-to-word correct with the original RFC. So there are some minor formatting differences, but it's very close. So we thought that this is essential because then people are able to compare exactly the exact differences. So we had a couple of revisions, and in March 2015 we adopted this. Right now we are at 0.5 version of the working group. So we had 6 versions in total. The last core is in progress. Obviously, this is a big document, so it's longer than usual. So we thought that you could use the rest of the IETF time to review it, and also 2 weeks after you get back. So it might be useful. Okay, so a couple numbers. So far we had 12 revisions. We expected that there will be a significant amount of discussion regarding this, and we were right. So that's why we asked a separate mailing list. Currently, there's 867 posts there, plus many more that also included DHC, the primary list. So we tried to, keep the less important details to the B's list and bring up only those major things to the DHC list. We have 165 tickets. The great majority of them is closed. We have 6 outstanding. Most of them are editorial, so we'll deal with them on our own. But there's, I think, 1 or 2 that we would like to discuss. There are 8 contributors. The text is 134 pages long. Okay, so I thought that people who are going to review it might have some questions. So wait, why did you change this? So here's a guide or a hint how you can get to the bottom of any change. So the first thing is you can use the div tool. I presume that everyone knows this. So it's a no-brainer. But also we keep the intermediate versions of the draft in GitHub. So you can click there on commits, and then you will get a list of all the changes. You are more than welcome to review all 327 of them, but there's a better way. So there's something that's called git blame. So for the whole text, you can get a list of specific commits and authors who changed a specific line. And then you can see what the commit was. There's a reference to the ticket number. So then you can go to our issue tracker, and then you will get the whole discussion that led to this particular change. And of course you can, sorry. And of course you can see the meeting minutes because on average we were meeting once a month. So the group of authors were just, calling in together, discussing issues, and then, acting on whatever we thought was the best way to go. Okay, so speaking of the big changes, definitely the most important one is that we are adding PD support. So it was a separate RFC, now it's bundled. So that requires a lot of updates in many places throughout the text. So now we say leases instead of addresses. So hopefully the text is now universal. Another major change that we did was to rework the client-server processing sections. The original text had separate sections for the server discovery and then for the assignment phase. So if you are not an expert in how the protocol works, you might fail to see the connection between them. So right now we think that it's better structured. So we have section 17, which essentially has 2 major subsections. The first one is for the server, the second is for the client. So if for example, you want to start implementation of a client and you are wondering what the client is supposed to do, you have a one big section that documents this. It's not spread out throughout the whole document. We also incorporated the stateful issues, that's 7550. So the original reason why this RFC was created was that the way sorry, the way AINA and AIPD was treated was inconsistent. So now it's uniform. Okay, so after much deliberation, we decided to remove delayed authentication protocol. The primary reason was that it was 12 years since it was published, and we still haven't heard about any actual deployments of it. There were significant issues with it, so it was never adopted by anyone. There were some experimental implementations, but nothing, productized. So we decided to simply get rid of it, especially that hopefully we have secure DHCPv6 around the corner. Hopefully. So we also incorporated a number of RFCs. 3315, that's pretty obvious. 3633, that's PD. The stateless DHCP, also SolMaxRT, InfMaxRT, and the stateful issues. One other thing that is currently different is that confirm message is optional. So the reason why we made this decision is that there are some clients that don't have any stable storage. So once they reboot, so technically they are still assigned a list, but they don't know how to, they don't have any means to store that information. So after they reboot, they start blank. So they go then to solicit. Okay, so that's it about the major changes that we did. So now I'd like to go through the outstanding issues or topics that I think we should bring up to the working group. So the first one is the default DOID type. So the problem is that when you're talking about an enterprise network, for example, and you have new devices pre-configured, and the problem is the default DOID type is LLT. So this is link layer address plus time. So you don't know what the actual value is until you boot the device. And in many deployment models, this is really not possible, or it has significant overhead. So in V4, this is very easy because on the box, you typically have MAC address. You can type it in, enter into your provisioning system, and your network is ready when the device boots for the first time. But this is not the case in V6. So it's awkward. So, and vendors, even if they wanted to help, they can't because they really don't know the time when the device will be booted first. So there are a couple possible ways to solve this. The first one is to change the default type to LL. That would solve the problem technically, but the problem is that it would take like many years, maybe a decade, before we see the last devices that are using LLT to disappear, maybe more. So it's not really feasible in my opinion. Ralph? Okay, so another alternative is to remove the restriction. The text currently says that the server must not look into DOID content and it must treat it as opaque value. So if the server is allowed to look inside the DOID, that will solve the problem, but it's slightly tricky. If you don't do it correctly, you might get hurt badly. And finally, the last solution would be to don't do anything and say, okay, what we have is sufficient.
I don't mean to do the engineering. Oh, Ralph Drums. Don't mean to do the engineering on the fly, but is there another alternative of creatively interpreting LLT, which is that the devices, I mean, I assume these devices are booted up to at least test them once someplace. If they are, could the LLT be scribbled down at that time, picked and scribbled down then? I don't know.
The answer is it could, but that causes typically problems for the manufacturer because it complicates the process.
Okay.
Right. There is already text in the document, that was in 3315 that says, there are certain conditions where no, you should use DUID with just a link layer because you don't have a stable storage and things like that. So, I think there's an argument to be made that the guidance that's already there is probably sufficient unless we wanted to force everybody to just use the DUID LL.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Thanks.
So, my personal preference is that we take the last option, which is do nothing and leave it the way it is, because people have lived with it, and any change that would be made, as Tomek says, would take a while before it would even become effective. But that's the reason we're bringing it up, is we just want that. It was an item that sort of got put in the queue very late. We did have some discussion on the working group mailing list, and my read of the general consensus on the mailing list seemed to be, people said, while there's some statements made about doing changes, I think most people felt it was probably better just leave it alone. But maybe that's debatable.
So Krishnan, so I'm trying to understand something, right? So if you want to use DLL, just use it, right? So you're going to configure the device, configure it to use DLL, right? So,
right.
So I'm just trying to figure out why you need to change defaults. If you want to pre-configure and you want to do it, just do it.
Yeah,
no?
and I think that there are industries that have done that, like the Cable Labs DOCSIS specifications say that the cable modems and CPEs should use the DUID LL.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in that case, maybe the reasonable compromise is to just have some non-normative text that explains what the possible issue is, and if you think that this will affect it, one way of solving it is to use a different DUI type.
Okay. Any other comments?
Martin Szulewski, maybe it's a dumb question, but why can't you just use DUID LLT to get the link layer address that you're interested in?
Of course you can, and most vendors are doing this, but technically this is a violation of the spec.
So if this is a violation, you could just remove the restriction, server must not look into DUID content and call it a day, right?
So that's effectively option 2.
I mean, I never perceived it as the option, because if you go with the option 1, DUID LL, then you have to also follow with the option 2, which is you have to interpret the DUID LL, right? So, I mean, first and second always go together, whereas the second one could just go up by itself. So you don't change the DUID LLT as a default, and you just have a look into the link layer address field within DUID LLT to find what you want.
Well, I think there's a subtle difference between them, right? I mean, removing the restriction means that what does that mean? It means, okay, the server can look into it, but does it mean it can change? What if there are two clients that present the same MAC address but different times? Are those the same client or aren't they? And I think that
the problem with DUID LL too, right?
Right, but there the server is clear. It treats it as one client because that's all it can do, right? In the other case, it's unclear. So I think there's a huge difference. And, we also, today we also have for relayed clients, there's also now an option, I forget the name of it, where the device link layer, I think it's called, is already available, right? So if you want to use the MAC address the client actually is presenting to on the network, to the relay agent, you could use that. Now, of course, today there's many issues with that because, of all the privacy stuff that if you're starting to change that.
Simply the relay agent doesn't have to include this information, right?
Right. It's not required either, right?
So I don't know. I mean, to me, if you ask me, I would say option 3, don't do anything. I mean, maybe option 2. I meant that, option 2 is a
Wait.
possible one.
You want to remove the restriction?
I mean, I'll be fine with that probably.
Okay, well, I still think there's an
didn't see any
ambiguity
value-
there.
I didn't
though.
see any real value added with this restriction. People already do it anyway, right?
So Krishnan, like, I understand what Marcin says, but I don't think we should do 2 really, because you're trying to add like DUID-LL as a fallback type for LLT, and like what if you get like 2 matches, like, right? Like, so, and I don't know, like I think we should not specify, like I'm sure people will do it, but I don't think we should like encourage people to do it. So I would go for 3 with the text that Tomek was suggesting.
Andrew Chenko. So I would echo the opinion to go with 2 because there is an operational need for that. And there are already, well, manuals on the web which tell you how to do it. So probably if we prohibit that, we're not helping operational.
So discussion again. So if I understand correctly, Andrew, right? Like there's like people do a lot of things, right? And why do we have 2 types? If you're only going to look at part of it, right? So like your suggestion could be like get rid of LLT. Like maybe that's something we can debate, but like if somebody is putting in an LLT, like it's probably because they want it, right?
No, not to get rid of LLT, but remove the restriction that the server must not look into the content.
But that's what they mean. It means the same thing.
Well, I think the question is what do you, if you're looking inside to extract the data, what are you doing with that data? If you're saying that this is now the client's identity, even though it presented a different one, I think that's wrong. If you're doing it to look up the MAC address in some sort of database to say, is this a MAC address I know and is a subscriber's MAC address, that's perfectly okay. Okay, to me, that's perfectly okay. All right. So I think that's where the remove the restriction, and I mean.
So it's the semantics of this, of interpretation of this, that we must not remove the restriction in interpreting it as a client identity, but we allow to snoop into that field.
Well, and I don't, I mean, that prohibition is text, right? People will do what they want to do, right? And if you really want to look into that data, there's nothing that prevents you from doing that, even though the text says you shouldn't, okay? And I think, again, that the text was there primarily in the, personally, I think the text was there in the context of sort of saying, if you're going to use this as a client identity, you got to use the whole thing, okay? And yes, somebody can interpret it to say, if you're going to compare, you should use the whole thing, okay? Because it should be an opaque identifier, right? That's what the text kind of says. But again, people can do it even if the document, says you can't, because they do it all the time. So it's just a matter of, do we? I think, if we were to remove the restriction, I think we'd have to do it very carefully, because we would want to make it clear that the server, has to continue using that identity as the identity of the client in terms of its interaction with that client and what it retains, right? But it can use the information in other ways to do lookups or validation of something.
Answer question. One more thing, like probably to talk to Andrew, because he's like a security guy. So the point is, like, let's say you start using like random MAC addresses, right? So you don't want this kind of like funny examination to go on, because it could be somebody completely different. You don't want to give back some stale state to somebody else.
So I think, maybe we should just ask a poll of the room to see how people feel about this, and how many think we should move to change the default type to DUID-LL. Can we get a hum for that? How many would like to see text to remove the restriction? And again, the restriction would be removed just in terms of being able to use the data for some sort of operational purposes or whatever, not to change the client's identity. And again, I don't have the text for that because it's probably a nightmare to write that. But how many people are in favor of doing the remove the restriction? And then the third one is, how many feel we shouldn't do anything? Okay, it seems like nobody wants to change the default, and more people want to leave it alone, and some want to remove the restriction. So we'll confirm that on the list. Okay, and there is a draft currently in 6-man about default interface identifiers that updates 3315. And so, it is something we need to watch, and we want to incorporate this into 3315 biz, assuming, the timing is right. But it's also a question about, if we have objections to the text that they're proposing to replace here, we should make those comments to the authors of that draft. It is right now in working group last call, but there are some open issues that they need to still resolve. So there will be another rev of that document. And there's even a debate about, should they document, should they specifically have replace this with that? And so it's possible that that section will get removed, and then it would be, potentially up to us or somebody else, when we do the biz of 3315 biz or something to fix the text in some way. It's a pretty minor change in that, this is all really about the whole privacy issues and pervasive monitoring stuff. So, it's just, I just want to raise it to people's attention. And again, if you don't like the replacement text, please let's discuss either now or on the working group mailing list.
Suresh Krishnan, I don't like the replacement text. So
I agree with you.
Okay, so there's like a small issue with the stable privacy addresses, right? There's like a key that's required to generate the address, which means that the DHCP server needs to maintain a secret key for each client, and that's not nice.
Well, it's not each client. It needs it for like a server-wide key or something. But
Brian Haberman, and I can take a crack at answering that for Suresh because I think I know the answer. So the draft that is currently sitting in there as a reference, the DHCP v6 stable privacy addresses, is using an algorithm that has a couple of parameters that were very explicitly drawn from another document that does exactly the same thing, just for stateless address auto configuration. And in order to make sure that you don't end up generating the wrong kind of address, those parameters have to be stable. And so as a DHCP server, if you do this, you're either going to have to keep something laying around that is specific to each client, or you're going to have to do a lot of number management in order to at least make sure that you have enough randomization in order to make sure you generate these unpredictable addresses. So I think that's the concern that Suresh has. I got up here because when that particular draft was circulated, I think some of you will remember me making some very pointed comments about, are we over specifying what a DHCP implementer should do in order to do this? My point is that I think as long as DHCP implementers are given some general guidance as to what characteristics that these types of identifiers have, is completely sufficient, and they can generate whatever algorithm they want, right? It doesn't have to be that particular one, because I can guarantee that if everybody implements the same one, then the chances of somebody else finding a way to start predicting those numbers will go up, and you'll be right back in the same situation where everything is predictable. So I would rather see this in relation to DHCP simply say, these are the characteristics that we want your allocation algorithm to follow, full stop.
Yes, and I think, putting the note in about the reserved IPv6 address identifiers is worthwhile, just to remind people about that.
Exactly.
So, Suresh?
Yeah, so I don't want to do this as to discuss this right now, but I would propose to take the original text, add some stuff like Brian said, but also replace the reference to 2373. That's 2 generations old. Okay,
Yeah.
so 2373 got obsoleted by I think 4291, and there's a 4291 bis. So if you point to 4291 bis, I think most of the stuff that Brian is talking about is already covered in there. So keep the text as is, add some text about privacy and avoiding 5453, but just point to 4291 bis, and that should make it complete. So.
Okay, so I think we'll discuss it amongst the co-authors, but one of us will propose some text to the mailing list and circulate that fairly shortly. And I've already alerted Alyssa, and I will also CC her on our proposed text, just so she knows we are discussing it, and checks in with us before doing the next rev of that document, assuming they don't take that whole section 6 out. Which is something they're discussing. So we already mentioned this earlier, but again, as part of your review, if you feel the document really it doesn't change much of anything, and your implementations will all be compatible with it, and you think we should attempt to do the advancement of the standard, let's discuss that. Lorenzo did send out an email today to the list that he would like some of the language changed regarding prefix delegation to sort of decouple that from delegating and requesting routers. I think because there is a move to assign full prefixes to clients or end hosts, or maybe just clients is a better way to say it. I think we've already done a lot of that to use clients, but I think we can probably look at changing the wording a little bit to try to remove or even reduce the linkage to routing in this section. But again, it was a thing that was just presented to the email list today, so we'll need to look at it.
Ian Farrer. Lorenzo's email touches on, I think, an important point, and something I think is still an omission from this document, which is the common case that I see, whereby the first relay is in the network is functioning as a delegating router, and you have a separated DHCP server that's actually dealing with that, doing the allocations and managing the leases. The text in 3633 was very, very way behind on this topic, and the same text has now made it into the 3315 bis. I would really like to see this text on saying how this particular functional element, which is something which is available in at least 4 router vendors, sometimes more than once in some implementations. It's a common function. It exists out in the network. A lot of people are using it, and we say almost nothing about it at the moment.
Yeah, we did briefly discuss this in a sort of pre-meeting some of the authors had on, to prepare these slides and stuff like that. And we just briefly discussed it, and we haven't yet come to conclusion, but I think our feeling was that this was probably something we may, at most we want to say sort of out of scope how you address this. We may want to point to the problem, but sort of say that, that's out of scope for this particular document to address this issue. Now, on a related topic, because this is really the snooping issue that we're talking about, that relays have to snoop, and they snoop for a lot of other reasons than, like again, in DOCSIS or cable labs, the relays snoop for a lot of other reasons. And there's even another document, the Savvy document, that really talks about, trying to monitor and listen to V6 traffic, DCP traffic, to try to keep, that's a source address validation document. And so it tries to allow routers and switches or whatever to do more validation about the addresses being used, that they really were DHCP assigned or whatever. So so where we're going with that is that, it is a complicated issue. It's going to be more complicated when we have secure DHCP v6, and I didn't bring it up there, but it is going to be an issue that, if relays are doing snooping, right, when the data is encrypted, which is what secure DHCP v6 is all about, they're not going to be able to snoop unless you give them, they have the server's keys, right, which is probably not something you want to do. So I think this is going to be a bigger issue. How do we address the snooping issue, and B, what does it mean? What do these additional network elements, i.e. the relays and routers, need to do?
So, I agree with you that, certainly within the secure environment, I see that as being a different problem in this case. As it stands at the moment, we've got a lot of vendors that have, had a bash at doing the right thing with differing degrees of success. It may well be that Savvy specifies this well enough that you could just say, if you implement this, it will just work. I have spent some time with that document, but haven't been through it in enough detail yet to say whether that's the right answer or not. But within the scope of what's been discussed in 3315 now, in the BIS document, now that these have been combined, there is a very common deployment scenario which is just kind of completely ignored.
Right. And again, but I don't think we kind of thought that this was not something, we're not going to solve this problem in 3315 BIS. Okay. And I think, and it also would change, what the goal of 3315 BIS is. Now, if you want to write a separate document that discusses that and stuff, that's great. I think what we kind of thought that we would do in 3315 BIS is just point out the issue a little bit more clearly than I think the current text does. And just to say it is out of scope of this document. And, if you write a document, then we'd have something.
Okay, that may be a way of tackling it. But if there was something in there that, that at least referenced the problem, because, as at the moment it's actually from the text that's in there, it can't possibly work. Yeah. So yeah, there needs to be some reflection in there, and maybe an interim document before a more permanent solution from the secure DHCP would be a final solution.
Okay, great. We just have a couple more minutes, so.
Marcin Śledowski. Just note to the authors of the prefix hint draft, if we decide to move from the wording delegating router to server and requesting router to client, it also affects their draft.
Yep, and that's a good point.
Throughout the text.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This is Alex Petrescu. So with respect to the earlier comment on the relay and snooping and all this discussion on 3315, I understand that there is going to be no change in this new BIS RFC with respect to that issue, but you are inviting for drafts to be written on this problem. I wanted to say that there is already a draft called root problem at relay for DHCP prefix delegation that I have authored and presented in an earlier.
Okay, can you send that out to either the name of the draft and stuff out to the list?
Yes.
About that, that'd be appreciated, because we can always, if it's already documented somewhere, it's easier for us just to say, this is a problem, go see this document. So I will have to take a look at it and see. But yeah, send that out to the list.
So I will send it, and then I will wait for a comment from you.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, so this is the last slide, and we have like 1 minute, so I should be brief. The last call will end of August the 9th. Since about everyone in the working group was involved some way, one way or another, Bernie and I could start the last call, but it would be inappropriate if we were determining the consensus. So fortunately, Ralph stepped in and he offered to become a shepherd. He will also determine the consensus. So keep in mind that you have 2 weeks after IETF is concluded to review it. So, and of course, we are looking for volunteers to review. So currently, Ted Lemon, Matt, team, the other team, Francis and Paul and Ian promised to review. Of course, the co-authors, well, they are well mandatory to review it. So if we have any volunteers, anyone?
The agenda?
Okay, so thank you.
And Tim is actually now a co-author, Tim Winters. So
Okay.
I forgot to move him down there.
Yeah. So that means he has to provide 2 reviews. Okay, so guys, just keep in mind that this is the essential document and it will not proceed forward without many independent reviewers. So if you are shy with, providing reviews before, just this is a very good time to, start doing the reviews. Also, if you really don't have time, just saying that you support it's nice, but it's much better to get it reviewed. So I suppose that's it. It's 1 minute over time, so thanks for your time and hopefully see you in Seoul.
Okay, thank you, folks. All right, so it worked out great. The timing wise.
Yeah, and we used full.
Oh, we didn't. We have to sign these, don't we?
Following the conversation we had.
Photo of what group? The whole, which group?
Okay. And I've got some other information for you. But
You want a photo of who?
Yeah, 5-20 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't do it at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, it's too late now. You should have gone up here during the presentation. Just take a photo of us here.
Actually use that the whole time.
Okay,
I know.
so should we meet here or at the registration?
It's cool, isn't it?
When I get back, let me have a look at what time's good for me and I'll ping you with that.
Okay.
Yeah. He should have done it. He should have done it early on. Come on.
I have no idea.